Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the Puyi channel. Today, once again, we're going to get cranked up and travel through World War II. Take a moment, though. This is, as the sign says, this is the Matilda tank. It was the standard issue British tank used in World War II. I don't know how it would compare with the American Sherman tank. I do know that it would not compare well with the German Panzer or Tiger tank, which could deal death. Yeah. All right. So let us begin, shall we? Don't need it. And there. So when we last left the Nazis in Europe, they had not only taken Austria, the Sudetenland, and I misspelled that, the Sudetenland, the Rhineland, but also seized the remainder of Czechoslovakia. Even Neville Chamberlain, Wimpy Neville, who had relented to Hitler at the Munich Agreement, upon seeing Hitler absorb the rest of Czechoslovakia, said that if Hitler makes one more aggressive move, there would have to be war. The French agreed with this as they sat behind something called the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line was I'll show you a picture soon. In fact, let's pull that up. And yes, we are back. So, Maginot Line, right? Here. The Maginot Line was a line of concrete fortifications that the French built that began here and ran all along the Rhine River, all the way to Switzerland. And that's what the French based their defense of Germany on, this line right here. It would have been great in World War I, but this was not going to be World War I. And so, yeah. And the French invested all kind of money in it. The Polish corridor, glad we pulled that up. No, I'm not. Darn it. The Polish corridor, we're back. The Polish corridor is right here. It provided an outlet for Poland to the Baltic Sea. That outlet, if you compare this map with that map, went right through German territory. And so Germany, once again, as you can see, lost a lot of property in World War I, and they lost this area here. This, East Prussia, is technically part of Germany. And so, yeah, that's what Adolf Hitler wanted, amongst other things. So, what percentage of Germans living in the city of Danzig? 90% of the city of Danzig were German. Why did Germany sign a non-aggression pact with their archenemy, the Soviet Union? To buy time. They wanted to be able to have a free hand, not worry about the Soviet Union, and by comparison, why did the Soviet Union sign an agreement that Stalin himself would not trust? Answer. Stalin, once again, didn't trust Adolf Hitler, but he thought that perhaps he could get 5 years. What were the terms of the agreement? Pretty simple. The Germans got the western half of Poland, and the Russians got the eastern half of Poland. What most historians consider as the beginning of the war starts with the Nazi invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939. However, most do not know two facts about this. As per the non-aggression pact, the German tanks and planes rolled into western Poland, the Russians were taking their half of eastern Poland. Why isn't this so publicized as the German attack on western Poland? Actually, quite simple. Because the Soviet Union fought on the American side in World War II. And to ally us in history books with the Russians mean that, we're just as culpable as they are. There's also a little known fact, interesting enough, that on August 31st, the day before September 9th, the Germans staged an attack by Polish forces on a radio station in the aforementioned East Prussia, right here. That was played on German radio, kind of like play-by-play, and was used as a pretense to begin the war the next day. The attack was broadcast live on East Prussia, from East Prussia. Gunfire was heard in the background, shouting. There were pictures of dead convicts in German and Polish military uniforms were photographed and in the newspapers the next day, although pretty much everybody knew that this was a fraud. So when the Nazis attacked Poland, they followed a pattern which would become a trademark of the Blitzkrieg style of warfare. Now, the short answer of what the Blitzkrieg is, it's two words, Blitz and Krieg. Blitz is German for lightning, Krieg for war, lightning war. The first wave would strike at the opponent's airfields, rendering the opponent unable to strike back at the Germans. The second wave would strike any and all transportation and systems, like, for example, railroad. No, forgive me. The second wave would hit radio towers and telephone centers, thereby, by striking at the radio and telephone centers and knocking them out of commission, basically you have blinded the country, because the northern part of the country cannot tell the southern part of the country what's going on, how to coordinate troop movements. And so basically, your first punch, you took away their ability to strike back. Second punch, you blinded your enemy. Third punch, you paralyzed your enemy. How? The Nazis flew people in and either blew up or took control of all bridges, all points of railroad exchanges, all important intersections. And so now the country was paralyzed. And finally, the fourth wave, the mop up. The Wehrmacht, the army, came in, as long as they came in fast, and soldiers even rode bicycles, and mopped up what was left. So the Soviets, in order to establish a buffer zone around their country, annexed Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and Estonia, who struggled, certainly with no struggle, but Finland put up a fight using the techniques of what today is the Olympic biathlon, fighting on skis. That lasted until the spring thaw, and the sheer weight of Russian numbers forced Finland to surrender as well. What followed was called the Sitzkrieg. You say, what does that mean? Well, that was a term the press, they call it the sitting war, in which the Germans waited behind the Siegfried line, while the British and French sat behind the rusting hulk of the Maginot Line. We talked about the Maginot Line. But see, World War II, as we're going to find out, is not a war of sitting in trenches. World War II is a war built on three things: speed, speed, and more speed. And yeah, on April 9, 1940, the Germans suddenly launched a surprise invasion of Denmark, which fell in 4 hours. Norway, which fell in 2 months. The Germans could now circumvent the superiority of the British Navy, launch air attacks from Norway, and hammer away at the convoys that fed the British Isles. Yeah, that's an interesting story. The children of Norway. There are a lot of interesting little stories about this, and I only know about this one because when I was 8 years old, I read a book about it. Yes, I was a strange kid, all right? Norway, when it was taken over, still had this large cache of gold bullion that the Norwegians said, we got to get this out of the country before the Nazis find it. And they would find it eventually. And so they used children on sleds. The children would ride their sleds every day and right under the noses of Nazi soldiers, and each sled would carry a bar of gold. They would take that bar of gold to some point, at which point it would be collected and then loaded onto a ship, a small ship, a fishing boat that made a regular run every day, so not to attract attention. And somewhere in a fjord, a British submarine would pop out of the water. They would unload the gold onto the submarine. Submarine heads back to London. In May of 1940, the Germans, for the second time in 30 years, made an end run into France by going through the Netherlands. Amsterdam was made an object lesson by bombing it for 4 days after it surrendered. Belgium, who had tried to declare neutrality, and finally tiny Luxembourg. The Germans raced literally at a lightning pace. Some even rode bicycles because, once again, speed through the thick Ardennes forest and bypassed the Maginot Line. The British, French, and Canadian soldiers who could escape soon found themselves trapped between the North Sea and the German army. What was the miracle of Dunkirk? After the Germans had circumvented the Maginot Line, 330,000 British soldiers were trapped, a little town called Dunkirk, and they had to get off. They had to get back to Britain, or the Germans would have taken them all prisoners, annihilated them. And so Winston Churchill called together, sent out a plea to try and get help. He called on every fishing boat, every ferry boat, every yacht, every pleasure craft, any boat that could cross the channel and carry people was sent to pick up soldiers in France. And they got them all off. Now they got them back. It was called the Miracle of Dunkirk. After Dunkirk, the resistance in France fell apart. French leaders surrendered in a railroad car June 22nd, 1940. That railroad car was the same railroad car that the Germans had signed their surrender in 1918. Hitler went there, and according to news releases, he danced a so-called jig. The Alsace-Lorraine region, which had went in World War I back to France, now went back to Germany. And France was divided into the Northern German Military Occupation Zone, and then southern France, the puppet government sat under the South under Marshal Philippe Pétain, called Vichy France. Charles de Gaulle was the leader of the Free French resistance. So after the fall of France, for a year and a half, Great Britain stood practically alone against a seemingly unstoppable opponent and separated by only some 40 miles of ocean. And also the Royal Navy and the RAF, the Royal Air Force, from complete annihilation. Also, it is worth noting here that the British Empire in the Far East was under siege by the Empire of Japan. Yes, Japan, the same ones who are tricking Puyi into becoming the Emperor of Manchukuo. It is also worth noting here that the British Empire in the Far East was under siege by the Empire of Japan. I said that again. The Japanese, by sinking the Prince of Wales and the British battleship the Repulse with carrier-based airplanes, demonstrated to an astonished world what could be done to a navy, even the world's best navy, with carrier-based airplanes. Hitler planned to knock the RAF out of the war and then land an invasion force of 250,000 soldiers to conquer England. So he began a day and night campaign of aerial bombardment of England, beginning with airfields, factories, but for some reason, on September 7, 1940, the Luftwaffe quit bombing airfields and simply tried to bomb civilians to demoralize the people of the cities. Actually, this backfired. It also allowed the RAF to catch its breath and repair their airfields, and put more planes in the air, and take the fight to the Germans, which is exactly what they did. Three factors that kept Britain from being conquered. Three things. Number one, easily the RAF, the Royal Air Force. Never in the history of man has so much been owed by so many to so few, was Churchill's words. And two, a new British invention that was discovered quite by accident when they noticed that as they passed through fog, that sound waves, radio waves, would bounce off solid objects. And the invention was called radio detection and ranging. We call it radar. Yeah, radar. Been about in World War II. And finally, the third thing, British intelligence. British military intelligence. MI6 was much sharper than German intelligence. I mean, there was an incident where the Germans had a good network of spies themselves. One particular German spy posed as a British scoutmaster, And what this scoutmaster would do, he would take his scout troop out on hikes on a weekly basis. And while he was out there, he would make observations of what he saw. And then at night, he would wake up at a certain time, pull a shortwave radio out from under his bed, tap out a message on the radio. That message would be received by a German submarine offshore, and then the German submarine would submerge and take the message back to Berlin. Here's the thing, though. The British knew about the guy. They knew who he was. They knew what he was doing. But problem number one, Great Britain only had 100 tanks in all of southern England. And 100 tanks, you're welcome, 100 tanks is not a lot of tanks. Not for this time. The Germans had many, many more. And so the British didn't want the Germans to know that they had only 100 tanks. And so what they did, they found out that Scoutmaster's schedule, where he was going to hike. And so, for example, one day he'd be hiking down the road, and suddenly here comes a giant column of tanks. 100 or so tanks just roll right past him. Next week, he's going to be hiking next to a railroad track. And when he's hiking by there, guess what? Here comes a train. On the train, 100 tanks, all with fresh coats of paint and all with fresh new serial numbers. Next week, he's hiking somewhere else. He walks by a giant military installation parked next to the fence, 100 tanks, new serial numbers, new paint. Finally, this guy said, there are tanks all over this place. Thank you very much. Enigma, by the way, was give me a second. The Enigma was a code machine. A code machine that the Germans used to break down their own code. The Germans had this very advanced code. And all German submarines carried the code breaker. And Berlin would send out messages in code. And the machine in the submarine could decode the message. That way they could broadcast live across the oceans. Now, when it says they're U-571, I'm sure most of you haven't seen that film. You're not the history nerd that I am. Where, a British unit actually captured a German submarine, captured it, and then took the Enigma machine off of the submarine and then sank the submarine so that the Germans wouldn't know that they had it. And so, anyway, the Battle of Britain lasted from June 1940 until May the 10th. And that was the first real defeat for the Germans and Hitler. Who was Berlin Betty? Berlin Betty was a German radio personality that would come on the airwaves at night, play the very popular jazz music, and then make predictions and would talk to the populace. Tell them that, for example, the Germans were their friends, tell them that their leaders were deceiving them, tell them that, they needed to surrender to the Germans, that the Germans would treat them well. And actually, it was all pretty effective psychology, pretty haunting, in fact. At any rate, I think we'll stop here in Roman numeral 8. Okay? And there we are.